The day her life changed did not come with noise or drama. It came quietly, folded inside a thin brown envelope placed on her small kitchen table. She stood there for a long time before opening it, still wearing her work shoes, still holding her phone in her hand like she might call someone for help. The letter explained everything in cold, careful words. The house she had lived in for years was not fully hers. It had been left to her by her aunt under one clear condition. She had to be legally married within 90 days. If she failed, the property would go to distant relatives she had never met. She sat down slowly. The room felt smaller than usual. That house was not just walls and furniture. It was safety. It was memories. It was the only place that still felt steady after her parents passed away and after her aunt raised her like her own child. Losing it would mean starting from nothing again. She checked the date at the bottom of the letter. The clock had already started. At first, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded impossible. Marriage was not something she could arrange like a phone plan. She was not seeing anyone. Her last relationship had ended 2 years earlier, quietly and painfully. Since then, she had focused on work, bills, and surviving 1 month at a time. Romance had slowly slipped out of her life, without her noticing. She called the lawyer whose name was on the letter. He spoke kindly, but firmly. There were no loopholes, no extensions. The condition had been written years ago and legally sealed. A civil marriage would be enough, he said, but it had to be real and registered. When the call ended, she stared at the wall and felt something heavy settle in her chest. The next few days passed in a blur. She mentioned the situation to a few close friends. They reacted with shock, then jokes, then silence. One suggested a fake wedding. Another asked if she could just move out and start fresh. But no one had a real solution. As the days passed, the number 90 began to feel smaller and smaller. Her routine did not change because it could not. She still woke before sunrise, took the bus across town, and worked long shifts at a quiet place where people came and went without noticing her much. At night, she returned home tired, her thoughts louder than the traffic outside. She started counting days on a small calendar, marking each one with a pen she pressed too hard. One evening, after a long shift, she stayed late to clean up. The place was nearly empty. She was putting chairs back when she noticed someone still sitting near the window. He looked out of place, not because of his clothes alone, but because of how calm he seemed. He was dressed simply, but neatly. Nothing about him was loud. He waited until she finished before speaking. He thanked her for staying late. His voice was steady, polite, and unhurried. She nodded, tired and ready to go home. As she moved toward the counter, he asked a simple question about her day. She gave a short answer, the kind people give when they expect the conversation to end. But he listened closely, like the answer mattered. Something about that made her pause. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the pressure she had been carrying alone. When he asked how long she had worked there, she answered honestly. When he asked if she liked it, she hesitated, then told the truth. She said it paid the bills. Nothing more. He did not interrupt or offer advice. He just listened. After a moment, he asked if she believed life always followed a straight line. She shrugged and said no. He smiled slightly as if he already knew her answer. When he stood to leave, he thanked her again. As he walked toward the door, he stopped and turned back. He said that sometimes people find themselves trapped by rules they never agreed to, and sometimes help appears in unexpected ways. The words felt strange, almost too close to her own thoughts. Before she could respond, he wished her a good night and left. She watched him go, unsettled but curious. She told herself it meant nothing. People say strange things all the time. Still on the bus ride home, his words stayed with her. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the calendar on her wall. The days continued to pass. Letters arrived. Phone calls followed. The lawyer reminded her gently of the timeline. She began to feel like time itself was watching her, waiting for her to fail. She tried dating apps for the first time in years. Conversations went nowhere. Meetings felt forced. Every interaction reminded her that marriage could not be rushed without cost. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, she returned home to find another message from the lawyer. The number of days left had dropped below 70. She sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. For the first time, fear turned into something sharper. Panic. The next night, she worked late again. The place was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of cleaning supplies. As she wiped down a counter, she sensed someone behind her. When she turned, she froze. It was the same man. He greeted her like an old friend, though they had only spoken once. He asked if she was well. She hesitated, then shook her head without thinking. Something in his expression softened. He asked if she wanted to talk. Normally, she would have said no. But the weight of everything pressed too hard. They sat at a small table near the window. She did not tell him everything, only enough. A legal problem. A deadline. A situation that felt unfair. He listened again, quietly, without judgment. When she finished, she apologized for sharing too much. He told her she had nothing to apologize for. After a long pause, he asked a question that made her heart skip. He asked how much time she had left. When she answered, he nodded slowly. Then he said something that made the room feel unreal. He said there might be a solution. She was willing to hear it. She laughed nervously and said she was not interested in tricks. He assured her it was nothing illegal, nothing dishonest, just unusual. He asked her to meet him the next day somewhere public to talk properly. She almost refused, but curiosity and desperation stood side by side. When she got home that night, she stared at the calendar again. The numbers looked sharper than before. For the first time since opening the envelope, a small, uncertain thought appeared. Maybe her story was not finished yet. Maybe help really could come from a place she never expected. The next day, she arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the smell of coffee and pastries felt strangely comforting. She scanned the room, hoping he would be easy to spot. After a moment, she saw him sitting near the window, calm and composed as always. He waved lightly, and she walked toward him. "Mother!" Her stomach tight with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He greeted her with a polite nod. She sat down, fidgeting with her bag as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. He did not seem nervous, only focused. He asked how she was feeling, and she gave a cautious answer, hoping to mask the worry she carried like a heavy coat. He smiled slightly, as if he could see through the layers she hid behind. Without wasting time, he leaned in and spoke clearly. He explained that he knew about her situation, the letter, the deadline, the house, and that he had a proposal. It sounded impossible at first. He was a billionaire, he said, with resources and reasons for moving quickly. He offered her a solution to her problem, one that would guarantee she met the conditions of the will. In exchange, he asked for something simple, something that did not seem like much. A legal marriage, temporary, with no romance required. She was stunned. She could barely process the words. Her mind raced. Questions swirled. Who was he really? Why her? Was this some sort of trap? She could see the seriousness in his eyes and the calm way he spoke, but it still felt surreal. She laughed nervously, hoping to hide the panic in her chest. He listened, patient and steady, letting her speak without interruption. She explained that she had no experience with this kind of arrangement and that it all felt too strange. He nodded, as if he understood. And then he said something that made her pause. He said that life sometimes forces people into decisions they never imagined, and that refusing an opportunity could mean losing more than just property. She felt the weight of his words, heavy and real. He asked if she wanted time to think, and she nodded, grateful for the pause. He handed her a small card with his contact information and a time to meet again if she decided to consider his offer. He left without further words, leaving her staring after him, unsure whether to follow or run. The day passed slowly, each minute stretching like taffy. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind. She knew she could not ignore it. Her options were few. She thought about trying to find someone else, someone she could marry in time. But the reality of her life made that impossible. Friends could not help. Dating apps produced only awkward conversations. The thought of losing the house she loved, the life she had built, made the decision feel urgent, suffocating. By the evening, she decided she had to at least meet him one more time. Maybe it would be another conversation, nothing more. Maybe she could learn why he chose to approach her, why he seemed to know just what she needed. She dressed simply, avoiding anything too flashy. Her reflection in the mirror showed a young woman tired from worry, but determined not to let fear control her. The cafe was quieter this time, with only a few customers scattered at small tables. He was already there, waiting. He smiled when she approached, and she noticed how composed he seemed, even in a place full of strangers. She sat down and they spoke quietly, careful not to draw attention. He began by explaining more about the arrangement, laying out the terms carefully. It was clear, simple in some ways, but also extraordinary. He would provide the security she needed, legally and financially, while she remained herself. He emphasized there was no pressure to change who she was, no expectation of love or intimacy beyond what was required by law. It sounded almost too good to be true. She asked questions, and he answered them patiently. She wanted to know why he needed this arrangement. He explained vaguely at first, speaking in general terms about protecting his assets and privacy. She pressed gently, sensing there was more, but he remained cautious, only revealing that it was tied to personal reasons and past experiences that had shaped the way he lived. There was a sadness in his eyes when he spoke, a hint of a life filled with challenges and solitude. She felt a strange connection, a pull she could not explain. Hours passed. They discussed details, boundaries, and legalities. He answered every concern with patience and care. She began to see him not just as a stranger offering help, but as a person with depth and thoughtfulness. Still, the offer was enormous, and the idea of marrying a billionaire, even temporarily, was overwhelming. It was a life completely unlike anything she had known. As the conversation drew to a close, he said something that lingered longer than any words before. He said that the world sometimes offered second chances, moments when a person could step out of fear and into opportunity. He told her to consider carefully, but also to recognize that life was short. Sometimes risk was necessary to protect what mattered most. When she left, the rain had started again, soft and steady, washing the streets in silver light. She walked home slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but also the faintest sense of hope stirring in her chest. That night, she could not sleep. She sat on her bed, staring out the window at the quiet city. Her mind kept returning to the offer, to the calm assurance in his voice, to the thought that maybe, just maybe, this was a path she could take. She imagined what it would be like to have the house secured, to stop the constant worry that had shadowed every moment for weeks. At the same time, she thought about the man, a stranger whose presence felt oddly comforting. She wondered what he wanted, what his life was like, and why he had chosen her. Days passed in a strange rhythm. She met him again to finalize details. They spoke about the legal process, the timeline, and the expectations. Each meeting made the arrangement feel more real, more tangible. She began to notice small things about him, how he listened, how he remembered details, how he treated people around him with quiet respect. There was a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of her own life, and it was oddly reassuring. Despite her growing curiosity, fear remained a constant companion. She worried about public perception, about what people would think, about stepping into a world she did not understand. But the clock was ticking. She realized that waiting for the perfect solution or the perfect partner was no longer an option. She had to make a choice. And the offer in front of her was the only path that promised a solution. One afternoon, after another long conversation, she finally made her decision. It was not easy. She did not know what the future held. But she knew that if she did nothing, she would lose everything she had worked for, everything that mattered. She told him she would accept. His response was calm, almost gentle, and he promised that he would ensure her safety, her security, and the fulfillment of the conditions she needed to meet. There was no celebration, no dramatic gestures, just an understanding, quiet agreement that began to change both their lives. As she walked home that evening, she felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. She had stepped into a world that was unfamiliar, one filled with wealth, secrecy, and unexpected responsibility. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of control over her life. She had made a choice, and the future, uncertain as it was, seemed a little less frightening. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew that she had taken the first step toward securing her home, her life, and perhaps in ways she could not yet understand. Something more, the day of the wedding arrived quietly. There were no grand preparations, no flashy invitations, no extravagant dress. She chose a simple gown, something that felt comfortable and appropriate. She wanted to feel herself, not a character in someone else's story. The billionaire arranged everything efficiently. The courthouse was private, officials briefed and discreet. There was no crowd to watch, no photographers. Only the legal documents that would secure her future. As she walked into the small, plain room, she felt an odd mix of anxiety and relief. He was already there, standing quietly as if waiting for her arrival was a small part of the day he had planned all along. He smiled slightly, a calm reassurance that steadied her nerves more than anything else. She took a deep breath, trying to remind herself that this was a step. It's not the end of a story, and certainly not the beginning of a romance at least. That was what she told herself. The ceremony was short. Words were spoken clearly, formally, with the weight of law rather than emotion. When the official declared them legally married, she felt a strange emptiness mixed with relief. The house would remain hers. The debt would be gone. The burden of the deadline lifted. Yet, she could not ignore the subtle flutter of curiosity about the man beside her. He was calm, unreadable, but there was a quiet presence about him that made her feel both safe and unsettled. The first days after the wedding were awkward in the simplest ways. They lived separately in the beginning, only meeting when necessary to sign paperwork, attend official functions, or discuss boundaries. The billionaire had a world she could barely imagine. His home was immaculate, precise, and almost too quiet. Staff moved silently, rooms were pristine, and technology seemed to anticipate every need. She felt out of place at first, her own habits clumsy in such a controlled environment. Yet he treated her with courtesy, never making her feel small or unwelcome. Conversations were limited but meaningful. He never asked her to change, never demanded more than the legal bond required. In return, she followed the agreed rules, respecting his privacy and boundaries. Their relationship, as unusual as it was, felt surprisingly balanced. She realized that trust was forming quietly, not in grand gestures but in small acknowledgments, remembering her preferences, giving her space, responding calmly when she expressed worries. Despite the calm, rumors began to surface. People in his circle noticed the sudden, quiet marriage and whispered behind closed doors. Some speculated about motives, some about convenience, and others about secrecy. She did not hear most of it directly, but the tension was there. The billionaire remained composed, not hiding from scrutiny, yet not offering explanations. He seemed to understand the pressure of public attention, and he shielded her from it without question. Days turned into weeks, and the initial awkwardness softened. She began to notice details about him, small gestures, quiet routines, and subtle expressions. He had a way of listening that made her feel seen without words. He remembered things she had mentioned in passing and adjusted his actions accordingly. It was a kindness that went unnoticed by outsiders, but struck deeply within her. She began to feel something she had not expected: respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of admiration. One evening, after a long day handling legal and financial matters related to the house, they found themselves alone in his office. The room was vast, lined with shelves and books, filled with the soft hum of technology. They talked quietly, not about the marriage, not about obligations, but about life in general. She found herself opening up in ways she had not in years. She spoke of childhood memories, small dreams, fears she had kept secret. He listened, never interrupting, nodding occasionally, his presence a quiet anchor. He shared a little as well, not about business, not about money, but about experiences that had shaped him. Moments of loss, choices that had left lasting impacts, decisions that had forced him to live cautiously and privately. There was a sadness there, but also a strength that fascinated her. She realized that behind the calm, efficient exterior was a person who had faced challenges she could barely imagine. As weeks passed, their interactions deepened in subtle ways. Shared meals, quiet conversations, and small acts of consideration built a rhythm between them. She began to feel less like a guest in his world and more like someone trusted, someone whose presence mattered in its own right. Yet, she reminded herself constantly, this was not love, not even friendship fully. It was an arrangement, carefully negotiated, bounded by rules and understanding. But human nature is rarely contained entirely by agreements. Then came a day that changed the tone of their partnership. A legal issue arose that required immediate attention. He trusted her judgment in a small but critical decision. She handled it with care, consulting documents, weighing options, and proposing a solution. His acknowledgement of her effort was subtle, a nod, a quiet word of thanks, but it was significant. For the first time, she felt more than a participant in the arrangement. She felt like a partner in a real sense. The balance between formality and personal connection continued to evolve. He did not ask for more than she could give, and she did not demand more than he was willing to share. Their shared respect formed a quiet bond. They were learning to navigate the unusual circumstances together, discovering the possibility of trust and reliance without expectation of passion or romance. The simplicity of this mutual understanding created a sense of stability she had not felt in years. Despite the controlled environment and predictable routines, subtle emotions began to emerge. Moments of shared laughter, small kindnesses, and mutual understanding hinted at a deeper connection forming naturally. She noticed his gestures, the way he anticipated needs, the way he valued honesty and integrity. He noticed her resilience, her practicality, and the sincerity she brought to every interaction. Neither acknowledged it aloud, but the air between them began to shift. The weeks of living with the arrangement brought clarity to her life. She realized how much she had grown in a short time. The urgency that had once pressed upon her like a storm had transformed into a rhythm of responsibility, trust, and subtle companionship. She felt empowered by the choices she had made and the way she had navigated uncertainty. The legal marriage had solved her immediate problem, but it also opened a door to understanding growth and a connection she had not anticipated. One evening, she stood on the balcony of his home, looking out over the quiet city. The lights reflected softly on her face. He joined her without words, a quiet presence beside her. They did not speak immediately, letting the silence carry its own meaning. The world below moved in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the unusual bond forming above. And in that quiet moment, she realized that life had changed. Not just in practical terms, but in ways that would ripple through her heart and mind in the weeks and months to come. She did not know what the future held. She did not yet understand the full story behind his actions or the depth of his world, but she knew one thing clearly. The arrangement had evolved beyond simple legality. It had become a partnership, a shared space where respect, understanding, and human connection could grow. And that, she thought, was a beginning she had never expected but was quietly grateful for. Weeks passed, and the arrangement continued smoothly, or so it seemed. She had settled into the routine, moving between her home and his world with a surprising ease. She handled her responsibilities, managed her days carefully, and the pressure of the deadline had faded into the background. But life has a way of testing even the most carefully laid plans. One morning, she arrived at his office to find tension in the air. He was on the phone, speaking quietly but sharply. The look on his face told her that this was not a normal day. When he hung up, he explained briefly that a legal matter had arisen, something tied to his family and business that could not wait. Her heart raced as she realized that the calm world they had shared was about to face disruption. She listened closely as he explained what was happening. Someone from his past had returned. Someone with influence and motives that could threaten both of them if not handled correctly. she felt a chill of fear. For the first time, the security she had relied on seemed fragile. She had believed that their legal arrangement was the shield she needed, but now she saw it was only part of a much larger picture. He asked her to stay calm, assured her that he would handle most of the matter, but that she might need to act carefully if the situation worsened. She agreed, though unease gripped her. The days that followed were tense. Meetings, phone calls, and private consultations filled his schedule. She remained a quiet presence, observing and learning, aware that danger was close, even if she did not fully understand it. She realized that his life was far more complicated than she had imagined, filled with responsibilities, pressures, and secrets that were not easy to share. Yet in the midst of the stress, he still took moments to check on her, to make sure she felt safe and informed. The small gestures mattered more than the words. They were proof of care in a way she could not ignore. Then came a moment that shifted everything. She was reviewing documents when a figure from his past appeared at his office unannounced. The tension was immediate, sharp. This person demanded answers, questioned decisions, and threatened consequences if demands were not met. She watched from the side, heart pounding, as he navigated the confrontation with a calm that belied the stakes. She realized that his composed exterior had been earned through years of dealing with crises, and that beneath it was a man deeply aware of the fragility of control. She could not help but step in subtly, offering observations that might help, pointing out details that he had overlooked in the chaos of negotiation. He acknowledged her quietly, a nod, a glance, small but significant. It was the first time she felt fully useful beyond the legal arrangement. She was not just a participant in a contract. She was part of the problem-solving process, a partner in facing real danger. As the confrontation continued, she began to understand the full reason behind his earlier discretion. His need for marriage was not just personal, it was protective. He had arranged his life carefully to prevent exposure, to keep vulnerabilities hidden from those who would exploit them. She realized that her presence was not just convenience, but a shield in the eyes of others. It was a weighty responsibility, one she had not anticipated when she had accepted his offer. Through tense meetings and quiet discussions late at night, she'd learned more about him than she ever expected. His decisions were guided not by impulse, but by strategy, by consideration for those around him, and by a sense of duty that extended beyond himself. She began to see the depth of his character, the resilience born from experiences few could imagine. Respect and admiration began to grow in ways she could not name, but she kept them carefully contained, aware of the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. Despite the external pressures, there were quiet moments that reminded her of the humanity beneath the wealth and power. One evening, after an exhausting day, they found themselves in his private study, sipping tea in silence. The tension of the day lingered, but the calm presence of each other was grounding. She felt the first stirrings of understanding. The trust could exist even in complex circumstances. The connections could grow quietly without expectation or demand. It was a revelation she had not anticipated, a gift hidden within the chaos. Then came news that threatened to undo their careful balance. A formal notice arrived, legal and public, questioning the legitimacy of their arrangement. The threat was immediate, and the stakes were higher than ever. She felt panic rising, feared that the house she had fought to protect could be lost, despite all her efforts. He remained calm, but determined, outlining a plan that relied on careful strategy and subtle persuasion. He asked her to participate, to offer insight and judgment where appropriate. Her heart pounded, but she agreed. Stepping into a role she had never imagined playing, working together under pressure, revealed new dimensions to their connection. She saw his decision-making, his patience, his ability to balance logic with empathy. He saw her resilience, her insight, and her courage. In moments of quiet acknowledgement, they began to recognize the value of partnership beyond the legal requirement of marriage. The arrangement was evolving, shaped by shared experience, by mutual reliance, and by trust earned in adversity. The conflict reached its peak in a private negotiation where stakes were highest. She sat quietly, observing, contributing when asked. Each word, each gesture, carried weight. The other party pressed hard, seeking concessions, testing resolve. Yet together, they navigated the challenge, finding solutions that protected both their interests. When the final agreement was reached, a sense of relief washed over them. The danger had passed for now, and the house, her home, remained secure. Afterward, they shared a quiet moment, a rare pause in a world that demanded constant vigilance. Words were unnecessary. The understanding between them was profound, unspoken but clear. She realized that the arrangement that had begun as a legal necessity had transformed into something more complex, a bond formed through adversity, respect, and shared responsibility. The days that followed were calmer, yet the experience had left its mark. She recognized the strength within herself that she had not known, the ability to face pressure, to make decisions under uncertainty, and to navigate complexities with care. He recognized qualities in her that extended beyond compliance, that spoke to judgment, courage, and insight. Their relationship, though still bounded by agreement, had shifted subtly. It was no longer just a contract. It was a partnership, forged in circumstance, tested by challenge, and strengthened by trust. She often reflected on the path that had brought her here. From the moment the envelope arrived on her kitchen table, her life had shifted in ways she could never have imagined. The fear, the urgency, the choices she had made, they had all led her to a world she did not know existed. And in that world, she had discovered not just security and stability, but understanding, connection, and the quiet beginnings of respect that could grow into something neither of them had expected but both recognized as valuable. The weeks that followed were calmer, but carried the weight of what had passed. She felt a strange combination of relief and caution. The house was hers, the legal obligations met. And yet the world they had stepped into together had changed both of them in ways that were not immediately visible. Their lives, once separate and distinct, had started to overlap in subtle ways that made ordinary tasks feel different. Even small moments carried significance now. They continued their routine, moving between work, legal responsibilities, and quiet evenings. The arrangement was still there, still formal in many ways, but the edges had softened. She began to notice small gestures, moments where he anticipated her needs, where he offered quiet acknowledgement of her presence. She, in turn, felt the desire to contribute beyond the required boundaries, to offer help, insight, and understanding where she could. The legal marriage had begun as a necessity, but it was evolving into something neither of them could have predicted. One afternoon, they were called to a meeting regarding an external business matter. The tension was high, and decisions had to be made carefully. She contributed quietly, observing details others overlooked, suggesting considerations that proved valuable. He recognized her skill without making a show of it, offering subtle acknowledgement that spoke volumes. In that moment, she realized that she had become more than a participant. She had become an active partner, valued for her judgment and perspective. The meeting ended successfully, and they left together, walking through the city streets. It was a rare moment outside the confines of work and home, a chance to breathe, to talk about lighter matters. They spoke about books they had read, places they had visited in the past, and moments that had shaped their lives. She felt a sense of normalcy in those exchanges, a reminder that even within the unusual circumstances of their lives, humanity persisted. Laughter emerged easily, and the tension of recent weeks softened, if only for a moment. Evenings became moments of reflection. She often sat quietly in her home, thinking about how far she had come. The urgency, the fear, and the panic that had once dominated her days were now replaced by a cautious confidence. She had navigated challenges she never expected, faced uncertainty with clarity, and found a sense of resilience she had not known she possessed. And all the while, the man beside her, quiet and composed, had become a presence she valued deeply, even if she did not yet fully understand the nature of that feeling. Then came a day that would change everything in subtle, profound ways. A public announcement regarding one of his ventures sparked curiosity and speculation. For the first time, she saw the scrutiny he endured, the questions, the judgments, and the expectations of the world around him. She observed how he handled it with calm, deliberate steps, addressing challenges directly, yet protecting what mattered most. She realized that this world of wealth, influence, and power was complex and often unforgiving, and that she had been given a rare window into it. Later that evening, they shared a quiet dinner. Conversation turned personal, as it rarely did. He spoke of moments in his past that had shaped his cautious nature, of experiences that had taught him the value of discretion, patience, and careful judgment. She listened, understanding more than she had expected, realizing that behind the efficiency and control was a person capable of deep thought and feeling. And as he spoke, she felt her own walls begin to lower, the human connection between them becoming undeniable. She, in turn, shared small stories from her life, her fears, her dreams, and the journey that had led her to this point. He listened with attention, nodding, occasionally asking questions, never judging, always valuing her perspective. They spoke of challenges faced and lessons learned. For the first time, it felt like more than an arrangement. It felt like a partnership, built not on necessity alone, but on mutual understanding, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared experience. As time passed, the lines between obligation and connection blurred. They continued to honor the agreement, but their interactions carried more warmth, more trust, more subtle signs of care. She noticed how he seemed to relax when she was present, how he valued her opinions, how small gestures communicated more than words could. And she found herself responding in kind, offering consideration, insight, and empathy. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The public scrutiny eased gradually. The threats from his past faded into background noise, handled with discretion and careful strategy. Life returned to a quieter rhythm, one that allowed space for reflection, understanding, and subtle growth. She began to see the depth of his character, the balance of strength and vulnerability, the careful navigation of a world that demanded much and offered little in return. One evening, as they walked along the quiet streets near her home, the air crisp and clear, she realized how much had changed. The urgency that had brought them together, the fear of losing her home, the improbable circumstances that had forced a legal marriage. All of it had transformed into a relationship of trust and understanding. She understood that their bond was no longer just about convenience or necessity. It was a connection forged through adversity, mutual reliance, and quiet respect. He looked at her as they paused near the park, the city lights reflecting softly in his eyes. He did not speak, but the presence, the glance, carried meaning. She felt the acknowledgement, the unspoken recognition that what they had shared was significant. Words were unnecessary. The trust, the shared experiences, and the respect between them conveyed more than language ever could. That night, she lay in her own home, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment the envelope arrived on her kitchen table to the challenges, decisions, and experiences they had faced together, her life had been irrevocably changed. She had found strength, clarity, and resilience she had never known. She had discovered that human connection, even in the most unusual circumstances, could offer support, understanding, and the beginnings of trust that might one day grow into something deeper. The arrangement had started as a legal necessity, a solution to a pressing problem, but it had evolved into a partnership, a subtle and complex bond that neither had expected. And in the quiet of her room, she allowed herself to acknowledge a simple truth, that life, unpredictable as it was, had offered her not just security, but understanding, connection, and the promise of a future shaped by mutual respect and choice. She did not know what lay ahead, but she felt ready to face it not alone, but with a companion whose presence had become both steady and meaningful in ways she could not have imagined. After months of careful navigation, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. She had grown accustomed to the quiet presence of the billionaire in her life, and he, in turn, begun to show subtle signs of trust and appreciation that went beyond the arrangement they had agreed upon. Their interactions had become less formal, the strict boundaries softening as understanding and respect deepened. It was a change neither had expected, and both were still learning how to navigate it. One morning, she received a letter at her home, not from a lawyer or an official, but from someone claiming to have knowledge about a situation connected to his past. The letter was vague, hinting at threats and unresolved issues, and it reminded her that their world, though calmer now, could never be entirely free from complications. She showed it to him immediately. He read it carefully, his face unreadable, and then he sat quietly for a long moment. Finally, he looked at her and spoke in a calm, steady voice. The matter would need attention, but they could handle it together. The day that followed was filled with careful planning. They reviewed documents, made phone calls, and arranged meetings to ensure that the potential threat would be neutralized before it could escalate. She observed closely, learning more about the nuances of his world, the subtle strategies he employed, and the way he balanced firmness with diplomacy. She realized that her role had become more than just a legal partner. She was now someone he relied on, someone whose judgment he valued. The realization filled her with both pride and a quiet sense of responsibility. As the day drew on, they encountered the person who had sent the letter. It was a tense meeting, held in a private office away from the public eye. The person demanded answers, raised questions, and hinted at consequences if demands were not met. She watched closely, noting the careful way he handled the situation, responding firmly yet without anger, maintaining control even under pressure. When he turned to her for input, she provided observations and suggestions, her voice steady despite the tension. Her contributions were met with subtle acknowledgement, a nod, a quiet word of thanks, signaling that she was seen and respected. The negotiation was long and exhausting, but by evening, the matter had been resolved. They had managed to secure their positions, protect their interests, and maintain their composure. As they left the office, the city was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The quiet of the evening felt like a reward after the intensity of the day. They walked together, side by side, not speaking immediately, letting the silence carry its own meaning. She felt a deep sense of relief, not just for the resolution, but for the way they had handled it together as a team. Back at her home, they shared a simple meal, the conversation light yet meaningful. They spoke of books, music, and small everyday events. A reminder that life could continue beyond the pressures and complexities they faced. She felt a sense of connection that went beyond formality, recognition that trust and partnership had grown naturally, quietly, and without force. The arrangement that had begun as a necessity was now layered with understanding and mutual respect. In the days that followed, they continued to navigate life together, handling responsibilities, attending meetings, and sharing moments of quiet companionship. She noticed the subtle changes in him, the way he paused to ask about her thoughts, the way he considered her opinions, the way he made small gestures of care without expecting anything in return. She, in turn, found herself more attuned to his routines, more considerate of his space, more eager to contribute in ways that strengthened their partnership. The relationship had evolved, not in grand gestures, but in the small, consistent actions that spoke louder than words. One afternoon, they attended a formal event together. She observed the way he interacted with others, noting the respect he commanded and the careful diplomacy he employed. She, too, felt a new confidence, walking beside him with a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Their interactions with others were seamless, the bond between them unspoken but evident in subtle glances, shared understanding, and coordinated gestures. It was a partnership that went beyond the legal requirements, a connection that others could sense even if they did not fully understand. That evening, as they returned home, they spoke quietly about the day, reflecting on challenges faced and lessons learned. She realized that the experiences they had shared had strengthened not only their practical abilities, but also their trust in each other. She felt a growing sense of admiration for him, not just for his wealth or influence, but for his character, his patience, and the careful way he balanced his responsibilities with empathy and consideration. He, in turn, seemed to recognize qualities in her that he had not expected: resilience, intelligence, and a quiet strength that complemented his own abilities. In the following weeks, life continued with a mixture of routine and unexpected events. There were moments of tension, challenges that required careful handling, and decisions that tested their judgment. Yet through it all, they found a rhythm, a way to navigate the complexities together. The partnership they had developed allowed them to face uncertainty with confidence, knowing that they could rely on each other for support, insight, and understanding. One evening, they found themselves alone in a quiet park. The city around them fading into background noise. They walked slowly, speaking of lighter matters, sharing small stories, and reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the experiences, both challenging and rewarding, that had shaped their relationship. She recognized that the legal arrangement that had brought them together had evolved into something deeper, connection based on trust, respect, and mutual reliance. He stopped for a moment, looking at her with a calm intensity that conveyed more than words could. She understood that he, too, had recognized the growth of their bond, the value of their partnership, and the trust that had been built through shared experiences. They did not speak immediately, letting the quiet of the park, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant hum of the city carry their unspoken understanding. As they continued to walk, she realized that the journey was not just about solving immediate problems or fulfilling legal obligations. It was about learning to trust, to adapt, and to recognize the importance of human connection. She had discovered resilience she had not known she possessed, skills she had never imagined using, and a sense of partnership that was both grounding and empowering. He had shown her the value of patience, strategy, and empathy, and she had contributed in ways that had earned his respect and reliance. The night ended with a quiet understanding. They returned home, each carrying the knowledge that their relationship had transformed from necessity to something meaningful. The house she had fought to protect remained secure, but the true value of their connection extended beyond property and legal obligations. It was a bond forged through experience, strengthened by trust, and marked by mutual respect. In the weeks that followed, they continued to navigate life together, aware that challenges would continue to arise. But confident in their ability to face them as a team, the legal arrangement that had begun as a desperate solution had grown into a partnership, a subtle but profound connection that neither had expected. They had learned to rely on each other, to value each other's judgment, and to recognize the strength that comes from understanding and trust. She often reflected on the journey. From the initial letter that had changed everything to the challenges, decisions, and shared experiences that had brought them to this point. She recognized that life could offer unexpected opportunities, moments of growth and connections that could transform even the most unusual circumstances. And in the quiet of her home, she felt a sense of readiness and hope, knowing that whatever the future held, she was no longer facing it alone, but with a partner who had become an essential part of her life, trusted, respected, and valued in ways she could not have anticipated.